I got tired of the corporate world.
Mm.
So I had always been a buyer and seller of stuff. And I had an antique store in New Hampshire, and I got into, it's the things that people get into in attics and basements is just gross.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, I was dealing in a barn with raccoon poo. And the amount of diseases I subsequently learned that come with this stuff. I grew up in the country, so I'm not used to avoiding things.
Right.
But somewhere along the way, I got what is probably an invasive mold infection. And I think it was in a contaminated high-rise I lived in on the Gold Coast in Chicago that would have these acrid smells come out of there.
It's not just mold then, it's mold plus.
Yeah.
Right?
And so having recently gone through, I was dealing with some hockey papers that had been in a wet basin for a long time. And these papers went back to the 1920s from a Chicago Blackhawk player. And that I discounted it. I know I have mold issues. I try to avoid it. Atlanta's a terrible place to be with mold. Just sitting in the Braves Stadium last night, you can smell it. It's such a humid night.
Mm.
And from these papers, I started getting headaches.
Mm-hmm.
And about 2 days later, I was sitting up here. We're in a high rise, and that I felt like my heart was going fast. And that I stood up, was kind of dizzy, and just sat back down and finished my meetings. And I went to walk to the car with my daughter, and my heart was still going fast. And it's about 3 hours later. I could barely make it.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going to an emergency doctor. I never get sick.
Right.
And so I don't even have a doctor down here. And so I went to an emergency room doctor I see maybe once every 2 years. And she's crazier than me, so we get along. And that she comes back and says, "Is the machine broken? Your heart rate's 206."
Holy smokes.
And we're taking you right over to North Fulton, which is not a nice hospital. And that they reset my heart, but they were looking and looking and looking. They couldn't find anything wrong with my heart. Obviously, your enzymes are off the chart.
Mm-hmm.
And saying, "You had a heart attack." No, I didn't have a heart attack. There's nothing wrong with my heart. You told me there's nothing wrong with my heart. They couldn't find it. And I said, "You either need to look at, I have a real mold issue, and I've been getting terrible headaches from mold. And so something went wrong with not being careful with dealing with all those papers. Or I had ripped my calves and maybe, back 8 months earlier, maybe a blood clot got loose or something." And, but this doctor wouldn't listen. He wanted to go do exploratory surgery on my heart. He says, "This, let me get in those ventricles." A nurse is stuffing something in my pocket, telling me not to see this doctor. And that, I went and talked to my GP later, and I have a ortho guy that you need to meet sometime, because he's such an awesome doctor. He won't do surgery. He does stem cells, platelets, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And they both said, "Will, you got to focus on the mold."
Yeah. When was this, Will?
This was in the end of May.
This year. I mean, so we're talking recent. Okay.
Yeah. And so for me, I'm healthy as a horse. I jog almost every day and don't have any heart blockage, none of that. I have low blood pressure for, almost low. It's like 115/75 or something. And so all this came as a shock to me about how could I be having this type of issue with being this healthy of a person, that I would never have paid attention. And I didn't pay attention to my heart rhythm or anything. Right. And I know I've cautioned Eric, because he has a little bit of the same problem. We took in a bunch of high-end clothing, couture, it would be, called. It's in the thousands of dollars a dress, from a socialite in New York to sell for a charity here. doing ballet in Atlanta, and it was full of mold.
Yeah.
And neither one of us, I made them isolate it, close it off, put it in bags, because I couldn't go in there without developing a quick splitting headache and getting brain fog and everything. And so to me, I want to share what I went through and talk to people in our industry about it, because it's a real hazard.
I call it the invisible pandemic, because you don't see it. Sometimes you can smell it. Sometimes you could see it. Can't hear it, but you can experience it.
It's frightening.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And I know Eric was going home from the warehouse and having a hard time breathing.
Yeah. Really classic side effects, headache, brain fog, asthma, skin issues, weight gain. These are all the top things that we see with mycotoxins. And then those are short term. And then there's long term, like degenerative disease, like Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, autoimmune disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, cancers. They're all implicated with mycotoxins, or maybe the other way around. Mycotoxins is implicated with all of these.
And see, it's interesting, because I would talk to our warehouse manager, who was an archivist for the Park Service before I hired him. And that people say, oh, yeah, mold. I have issues, but it's not that bad. And, well, people are different.
Right.
Our body chemistries are different. What we've accumulated in our bodies are different.
Yep. You totally nailed it.
That, to me, just because, and I didn't used to be bad. I mean, I've gotten a lot worse. I was very tolerant of this stuff if you go back 30, 40 years ago. And before I lived in this one building in Chicago, I had never had a headache in my life. I never had a nosebleed in my life. And I'm convinced something went back to that building. You
said it was a new building?
No, it was an old building. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, the smells would get so bad coming out of somewhere. You couldn't, at least I couldn't stay in that building. My eyes would burn. Something very bad was in there. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I would go out, just walk around Michigan Avenue, or go down, go up to the Hancock building and go get cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. And about 3 hours later, the smell was gone. But the building had to go back into the 40s. Mm-hmm.
Had it been recently renovated?
No. I'm wondering if there was something in the trash chutes or something. It's like you could do a horror movie of that building,
right.
And something coming out and just going in your body.
Yeah, it's probably behind the walls, honestly. There's probably a leak behind the walls that acts up either when it's humid or when it's too warm or something. There's something in that building.
And so for me, there was something that it's just it got worse over time. Reading about this stuff, it seems like it accumulates in your body. So somewhere later, we'll have to talk when I can be on your clock and pay you about how I try to detoxify my body some, and get some of this out of me, because I don't want it in me.
Right.
And it inhibits my jogging. So it makes me go more to the fat man jog, I call it. Instead of looking like an athlete going down the road.
Right.
But, it's just, I don't know what words of wisdom you would give people in our industry that, because we're in this junk all the time. People throw away stuff. Stuff is money. We'll dumpster dive. For me, I'm a tech executive. We're the suppliers of technology and data to our industry. Much like we did in the oil industry, we're building Ancestry.com for your stuff. Mm-hmm. We call ourselves the Internet of Stuff, where you can track provenance of things, mm-hmm. and blockchain them and keep them forever with their experience that they had while they were with you as a caretaker. What do we tell our people that use our products and they're out there every day making a living? What do we tell these people?
So it sounds like you're asking, like, how do people protect themselves when part of the nature of the job is to expose you to toxins?
Do we wear a body condom?
I think that might be overkill and very warm, especially when you're trying to deal with moving stuff. So I don't think body condom, but I think you need to take a step back and first say, okay, am I someone who's sensitive? There are people who are genetically sensitive to mold and mycotoxins and other toxins and don't detox that well. And then there are people who are not sensitive and detox well. And then, of course, there's the other permutations, right? Like not sensitive, but don't detox well, but it doesn't matter because they're not sensitive. So I think what you want to first understand is, are you someone who's sensitive? And if you are, then these are the precautions you're going to want to take. So one question, because I don't know your industry that well, is do you have to go into the basement or the attic, or can someone bring it out?
Well, that's where the good stuff is.
So you're sort of diving, right? You're prospecting. You're not responding to, I have a bottle. You're responding to, I have an attic. Okay. So then I would recommend that you always wear long sleeves that are made of a breathable, so cotton or linen are the best, but very light. Your skin is your largest organ, so you don't want to absorb toxins through your skin. So wear long sleeves, long pants, both of cotton or linen. You want to wear a N95 mask that's well fitted. You want to wear gloves. And if there's electricity in that home, I would bring with you a high quality HEPA grade air filter and plug it in the attic or the basement in your circle, right? If you're working 30 feet away, that small portable filter may not work. But if you can get it with an extension cord to be right where you're working, or bring it around with you like a light, you got your filter, I would bring that around with you to minimize what's in your immediate air zone. And then the minute you get out of there, you joke about wearing the body condom, but when you get out, any toxins that you disturbed are on your clothes. So you're going to want to change your clothes or gown up. I would definitely wear booties over your shoes so you don't track whatever's there into your own home, and protect yourself. Imagine like you're going for surgery.
It's interesting. I mean, I never would have thought of this stuff.
That's my job.
And so,
and then on those days, it gets even deeper, right, Will? So you don't want to eat processed or packaged foods on those days, because those are hard to digest. And anything you do that adds stress to the system will add stress to the system. So eat super clean, eat lots of green, leafy, organic vegetables so that you support your detox. Don't drink alcohol. Get enough rest the night before, the day of. I'm reluctant to recommend binders or specific things, but when you get exposures, there are things you can do, but this is that's medical advice. And I'm like,
right.
Oh, I don't think I want to do that for a range of people, but certainly eat clean and don't drink alcohol and get enough sleep, because if your system is rested and relaxed, you're less likely to get as sick.
So instead of taking my 6-pack of beer up in the attic with me.
That's not alcohol, by the way, according to my Irish friend. He's like, beer is not alcohol. Beer is what you drink with dinner.
That's funny. Take my LaCroix or something.
Don't take anything with you, because that necessitates taking your mask off.
Oh,
so
that's
really
true.
Be masked and cover your airways so that you're not breathing in these particulate, mold, toxins, VOCs. You have no idea what's down there, right? But mold is the biggest issue.
Wow. Well, the whole thing, and I look at, and one of the things my archivist was telling me about, because so many people have told me to go throw away these things, and I can't throw them away. They're historical documents. They're letters from President Kennedy that are handwritten out and things. But he said what they do on the Park Service is they put them in a freezer, and that they freeze the paper then, but the paper is in a freezer bag. So if I take this document, I put it in a plastic freezer bag, then I freeze it, and then I may have 100 documents in this small freezer. Mm-hmm. Then I pull the plug and defrost them. Then I freeze them again and defrost.
I'm not aware that kills mold.
that he claims it will kill the mold. What do you think?
I don't think it'll kill the mold. I think it will go dormant while it's frozen, but then when it defrosts, it's back. Bleach kills mold sometimes, but you don't want to bleach these documents. You're going to ruin them. I would say, so I don't have a good sense of what's the scale here. So if you have a document that you want to display, then that will be behind glass. And so that's a great way to keep it contained, right?
Right.
So I would recommend that. And then I'm kind of cynical, Will. I'm like, how much do you really need, right? So certainly something that Kennedy wrote and signed, and that's important, but maybe the minutia of the hockey history may not be, if it's scanned in and you have a record of it, that may not be as important. And then I'm thinking about, how you have photo books. I'm sure that there are the books for paper where you can put it and close it under the plastic wrap, or put them each in a plastic bag so that you're not breathing it. Essentially seal it off so you don't have to breathe it.
That stuff is bad stuff. I mean,
yes.
My God, it stings. Number one.
It's nasty. Oh, I thought of one thing that people can do that's not medical treatment, or a couple things. So Epsom salt soaks either foot or full body because that helps mobilize the mycotoxins that you get exposed to, or sauna. So both of those can help move toxins along. About a month and a half ago, we were trying to buy a home for my oldest kid to live in when they go to college. And we walked into this home. I literally got 4 steps in and I turned to my husband. I said, "This house has mold." And he's like, "What?" I said, "This house has mold. I promise you." So we get 20 feet in and I'm like, "This house has mold." And I knew I needed to leave, but I really wanted to use the bathroom because I'd just driven a couple hours to get there. So I go use the bathroom. I peek in the kitchen. I leave. The rest of my daughter, my husband, the realtor, and the inspection guy all spend another 10 minutes in the house, and they all leave the house. I've left the house. They come out 10 minutes later. I'm like, "We're not buying this house." And they're like, "We're all sick." So all 5 of us were sick from being in the home. And it was immediate. For me, it was immediate. I could tell. And then I had a stomach ache and brain fog and a headache that day. And then went home, did a sauna, took binders, did my whole routine because this is my life, and fasted, did a juice fast. And then 24 hours later, I'm like, okay, I'm okay. But yeah, you can certainly have immediate and delayed reaction to these types of things. And you may have been fighting it off for that day or two, but then you had a bad night's sleep, or you drank more alcohol, or you had a little bit extra sugar, you had a stressful day. It all matters. And so your system's not as optimized or primed for healing.
And it's interesting. I mean, I think back, and there's another situation I think to in my life, not for me, but for one of our customers that's an auctioneer up in Massachusetts, and he happens to be a friend. And he rented this building in downtown, I don't know if I should say where, but it was on the shore, very old building with a granite foundation. By old, I mean a couple hundred years. Wet downstairs, that's the way they were built.
Yep.
And granted, I'm sure it had some other issues with it on these, I don't know what they call it, you test for these gases, but they come out of granite in these houses. But the previous owner had kept a lot of paper down there. It all molded. And he also had carpeting, old, you see in these country stores or something, this old wall to wall over the wood floors. And I said to him, "You can't stay in this place as is."
Right. I
come in here and I don't feel good when I leave. I was helping him clean it out initially on the main floor. And he didn't want, he says, "Well, it's funny you mentioned this. My fiance is telling me the same thing. He's going to his second marriage. He's in his 40s. And the previous owner had died of lung cancer. And that very beloved photographer, a photojournalist in New England." And so I said, "Walt, you got a very good," he says, "I got too good of a deal. He has to put this money back in. What is your life worth to you?"
Right.
And he went back and expressed the concerns I did to the property owner. The property owner was appalled in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
He cleaned out that basement, put in ventilation systems, ripped out all that old carpeting,
Right.
and renovated the whole place for him. And did
That's really great.
And so the owner of the building was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And I know with God, I'm trying to think how that gas they have. They test your house for that gas.
For
radon.
Radon, yeah, radon.
Yeah, I lived in Florida. And I still do.
There's no basements in Florida.
But to get the places now above the flood zone, the flood level, they bring in crushed gravel. Mm-hmm. And all that crushed bluestone releases radon.
Oh, great.
So I was living in a new Pulte community.
What's Pulte?
Oh, it's one of the largest builders in the country.
Right.
Pulte. Massive project with a golf course they did. They put in crushed bluestone to raise it up above sea level or flood zone level. And that they tested my bottom unit for radon when I sold it, and it was full of it. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, I didn't stay there much.
Yeah.
And my realtor's afraid to heck to tell anybody because it's going to be subdivision wide. That's her subdivision, and she's going to be the bearer of bad news. I said, Nancy, do the right thing. Tell people. She was a hero and got all the listings after that. Mm-hmm. And everybody was putting in radon units. So I think that the moral of the story here is people want to know about this. And
yeah,
you
know, and you can't unsee it, right? Once you recognize what's going on, you can't be blissfully ignorant any longer.
No,
you know it, and you got to deal with it.
These are people's lives.
Yes,
and you have to do the right thing, but especially you have to do the right thing. It's not like, did I take that bottle of Coca-Cola or something? You're talking about people's lives.
Yes,
and that they're so precious, and what I'm learning is they're fragile.
I always think of humans like a construction zone. So it takes a day and a half for the wrecking ball to demolish a structure. And then it takes 2 to 3 years to build something beautiful in its place. And so at any time you can experience that wrecking ball effect, and then you have to essentially rebuild your health. So it is pretty fragile.
So how did you get into this business?
It was personal. I was diagnosed with celiac by my husband's mentor 17 years ago. And that started my interest in gut health. And then 5 years ago, I went to, it was 2019. So 2019? Hold on. 2019, I went to France for a week and came back and started losing hair and gained weight and got a rash. And it turns out that when I was in France, it was the week after Notre Dame burned and I got a lead exposure, and it was enough to send me off the cliff. So,
gosh.
Yeah. So I tested and had lead and mercury because I had mercury fillings for many years, the silver amalgams. Those are 50% mercury and they never stop off-gassing. And then I tested my mycotoxins because you can run a test on it. And I had 5 strains in my body. And then I tested the other grouping, which is things like plastics, phthalates, styrene, gasoline fume, flame retardant, nail polish additives. It's a whole long list. And I had a whole ton of those too. And I was like, wow, I'm really a dirty girl. And that was the impetus for publishing the book that we published. And that started me on this whole journey of we're all essentially experiencing death by 1,000 cuts of toxins. And at any time, you can have a massive exposure or you can have tons of small exposures that build up. And so we don't get sick because we're old. We get sick because we're exposed to toxins. And the older we are, the more toxins we accumulate in our bodies. So that's how I got into this.
Wow, you got me thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ignorance is bliss. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, it is.
Knowledge is power. Ignorance is bliss. You got to pick where you stand.
I was just thinking, I came back from my dentist this last week, and she was the first one. I've been seeing the same dentist, but she finally explained why this was getting black occasionally up on my gum. And she said, you have a leaking filling.
What kind of filling?
Silver.
Oh, crap. I would get rid of that. Go to a biologic dentist to get rid of it, not your dentist. Unless they're a biologic dentist, but
Yeah, and she says you need to get rid of it and get a crown. So that's what she wanted to do. But I just wonder how much damage it's done over the years, the decade.
Tons. Think about it. The thyroid is right next to our neck, and thyroid dysfunction is one of the most common things we see in health. So when you have these mercury fillings, they drain into the lymph. The lymph is right next to the thyroid. The thyroid goes crazy. And then where else does it go? The lungs, the heart, the pancreas. It really does serve as a tremendous system disruptor. I mean, but that's one of many. So I would say definitely get that filling out, but do it with what's called a biologic dentist.
Okay.
Someone who's trained to keep you safe from the mercury exposure while you're getting it taken out.
Wow. All right. So there's something that we never. Amazing. And
I know.
Maybe mold isn't the core of my issue, but it's part of the issue because I can't tolerate it anymore.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's so many things going on that you have to, just like for me, lead was the drop that broke me.
Right.
The mold is the drop that breaks you, but you got all this other stuff going on. So that's what you want to impact, so that your system, think of yourself like a rain barrel, and the emptier the rain barrel, the healthier you are, because as you fill up with stressors and toxins and irritants and mycotoxins and environmental toxins and heavy metals and your mercury and your stress and whatever, that's when you start to have symptoms. So that racing heart is the symptom of the underlying issue.
And I imagine that most people that would be our customers in our industry, they don't eat the best because they're always on the road. They're always stopping at the 7-Eleven. They're getting the Twinkie or whatever they can get quickly.
Twinkies don't degrade well.
That's what I heard.
They look the same now as they did 50 years ago. They could have been produced 50 years ago. They're just as fresh. That's kind of creepy. I actually have a hamburger from McDonald's and I have a hamburger from Burger King in my office in the entryway. I bought them in 2012. I bought them 11 years ago, and they have not rotted, decomposed, or gotten moldy. So is that food? Like, if it doesn't break down and if bugs don't make it moldy and break it down, is it food?
Yeah.
Just asking.
If the microorganisms won't eat it, and they're like Mikey, they'll eat anything. Remember that old Life commercial?
Yes.
Yes. Mikey, he'll eat anything.
So there's I think it's the tofu or the fake meat at McDonald's, or one of the big names, is one molecule different from a yoga mat. And it doesn't degrade because it's a yoga mat. It's essentially a yoga mat with barbecue sauce on it.
You bring up the one thing, or I think I learned two things in biochemistry, but that was one. And our teacher and professor in college would talk about the McDonald's milkshake. And it was only one molecule off from being TNT.
Yeah, it's not milk.
Yeah.
It's not really milk.
So it's like, ugh.
Yeah, that's pretty creepy. So a lot of that's happening in a lot of our food supply. And so between the preservatives and the pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and then the quality of the food itself, and then what we do to it to highly process it, it's really bad news.
You were profound for me. I mean, I've learned more from you in tens of minutes than I even thought I had accumulated in like 2 years, when I learned I needed to start taking care of my body.
Mm.
I love the Jimmy Buffett phrase, you treat your body like a temple. I treat mine like a tent. And I would tell people I treat mine like a pup tent.
Oh, geez.
And so for me, this is really helpful because I've learned just through these last couple of years that how fragile I really am.
Yeah.
And it's not just from I'm in good shape for somebody that's almost 70, but, I realized that my body's not going to last forever.
Right. What we want is for you to have every decade get better than the one before, as opposed to worse. But it takes something, right? It does. I do really think you're in the perfect age group, because as the road ahead gets shorter, you want to live it better.